Hello, everybody. We're very excited today in Poultry School. Um, we have a very interesting guest, Jesse Hirsh. First of all, I really don't know how to introduce Jesse. He's a futurist, a speaker, a loco. I don't know. But what we shared before going into this presentation is that I think that we align that we need to start thinking different. We need to start open our minds and our hearts and do something different. We call just putting some title to the presentation AI in the poultry industry, but I think that Jesse has a lot to share. So, amigo, thank you very much for having this time with Poultry School with our audience. I think that this type of conversation will bring a lot of, first of all, connectivity and connecting us in different way out of the box. So, Jesse, the time is yours. Always, this presentation will be shared after, maybe in 1 week. So, amigo Jesse, the time is yours and your screen, something that I think you love. Thank you.
Gra- gracias. And I thank you to everyone watching and everyone who will be watching. It's a privilege for me to share my learnings, to talk today about artificial intelligence and the poultry industry, partly because it's a subject that I'm really quite passionate about. I kind of refer to myself as a futurist farmer, and it's partly because I was a futurist before I was a farmer. My background is in technology. I did a master's degree almost 10 years ago now on artificial intelligence. And when I started thinking about where I wanted to apply I thought agriculture made the most sense. And even now, AI is really still in its infancy in terms of helping agriculture adapt, helping farmers make more with the limited resources that they tend to have. But of course, as soon as I became a farmer, I realized that all farmers are futurists. Because you have to be thinking about the next growing season. You have to be thinking about your livestock. You have to be thinking generations ahead, either in terms of the animals you're raising or maybe your children and the legacy you want to leave behind. So I really felt it was a good cultural fit to take my desire to learn, my desire to use technology and really apply it to my own farm. And even though I'm a novice farmer, this is going to be my seventh growing season, I'm of course privileged because I have access to the internet. Right? All the world's knowledge is just a mouse click away. I can be in contact with farmers all over the world, access their wisdom, access their knowledge. So in that sense, when I describe to people the kind of farm that I run, I call it a knowledge farm. In fact, we call our farm the Academy of the Impossible because we kind of feel that we're trying to achieve the impossible, both in trying to adapt to climate change, trying to use technology, but also to feed our family, to feed our friends, to feed our community as we enter into an increasingly volatile, an increasingly uncertain world. And, you know, that's where I do have to begin by saying today's talk is kind of a preview of a talk I'm giving in a month and a half at the World Egg Organization in Tenerife. So, you know, today is meant to be much more of a brainstorm. I'm being a little more honest today when I share my perspective and my ideas, because in addition to being a futurist and a farmer, I'm also a hacker. And when I say I'm a hacker, it means that I recognize that technology is just a tool, and I want that tool to work for me. So the same way that you might take apart a tractor or use carpentry to build a chicken coop, or lately, in fact, I've been teaching myself electricity so I can take more advantage of solar power, I kind of realized again that not only am I a hacker, but all farmers are hackers. And by that, I do mean computer hackers. We have to take the same attitude to our farm tools as we do to our digital tools, which means we should bend the technology to work for us rather than expect us to bend towards the technology. And unfortunately, when we talk about artificial intelligence and agriculture, when we talk about AI in the poultry industry, I'm worried that there are a lot of companies trying to take advantage of farmers when instead it should be the other way around. It should be farmers finding tools that help them, finding tools that extend their power, extend their farming operations. So while I do want to spend some time today focusing on specific AI applications in the poultry industry, I want us to take the philosophy of the hacker, right? The idea that you should be able to break your technology, fix your technology, repurpose your technology, no matter where it came from. Because I would hope that many of you as farmers are already doing that. You're building your own tools, you're bending your tools, you're inventing tools based on your agricultural practices. But before we go there, I have to acknowledge that artificial intelligence is kind of a contested concept. It's a very political word. Different people have different definitions of what they mean by artificial intelligence. And I don't want us to be distracted or disempowered by a lot of the nonsense or a lot of the propaganda that is out there. Because, for example, the most, I think, pervasive myth, the biggest fake news about AI is that it can think for itself, that it's going to come alive, that at some point AI is going to be like this godlike entity that will threaten all humanity, right? This is how Hollywood has portrayed AI, whether in 2001, in Terminator, in The Matrix, in almost every single movie that they've put out. But in fact, if you look at the science, if you actually look at our understanding of neuroscience, of psychology, of computer science, artificial intelligence is just a very big calculator. Right? It's just a computer that can perform very important, very phenomenal tasks, but the thinking is something that humans have to do, right? Especially the critical thinking, but also the way in which you relate to your farm, relate to your business. While there are a lot of AI companies trying to hype its capabilities, I'm here to say it is just a tool. It's just like the tractor, it's just like the scythe, it's just like a shovel, only it does pattern recognition, very advanced pattern recognition. And that's one of the reasons why AI can be so powerful. And I'll give you an example. This is AI used in a coop or a broiler, which can be used both to monitor the behavior of a chicken, can also count chickens, it can measure how they're growing. But it's this type of technology that we're increasingly seeing as a very useful and positive example of AI in the poultry industry. Because again, it's just math. You're counting birds, you're keeping track of birds. You can then do pattern recognition to tell which birds are indicating signs of weakness or signs of illness. You can tell which ones are not getting the right nutrition because they're not growing at the same rate. So in that regard, a lot of what AI provides is, quite frankly, surveillance. And not just surveillance, but the ability to recognize patterns within that surveillance, to find the literal needle in the haystack. And if you think about it, we've all been using AI for the last couple of decades in the form of a search engine, right? We go onto the internet, we go to Google, we go and search for something, and that's how we find it. So imagine you want to search for something amongst your flock. You want to be monitoring for something in your coop or your broiler. So that's one of the primary ways that AI has been around for almost a decade even in the poultry industry. And there's been quite a few advances, both in making sure people get as much productivity as possible, but also so they can identify potential illness, potential threats, or potential concerns before they start to become a problem. And that gets, into another example of AI, which are the kinds of robots that we're now starting to see in coops and in broilers. This is an example of a robot that deals with the cleaning, deals with litter treatment. This is one of an entire class of poultry robots that are basically designed to help automate the care of the coop or the broiler. They have different options in terms of what they're capable of, But again, they're both meant to reduce some of the human labor that's involved, while at the same time creating a more healthy environment, to create a more conducive environment to the birds' welfare, to their overall health, production. Now, these types of robots, while increasingly stable, are still kind of expensive. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about today is still on the pricey side, but I do want to give some examples of how quite the opposite is happening. That how AI and technology is actually making poultry agricultural operations more affordable. But I want to take a moment, since we were sort of talking about robots within the coop environment, to talk about the coop, or in my case, the chicken tractor more specifically. Because when I started farming, we had our birds in our barn. And the reason we had our birds in our barn is, I live in Canada, and here in Canada, it can get a really cold. I mean, for example, here's a live shot right now of one of my pastures and a couple of my horses. We just got 25 centimeters of snow yesterday, and we're about to get another 25 centimeters of snow tomorrow. So you can understand why our gut instinct was to keep our birds in the barn as part of a larger warming environment. But we started to get concerned about the health issues, the labor issues of cleaning it out. So in the last couple of years, I embraced what here in North America is called the chicken tractor movement. And this is basically where you create a mobile chicken coop that you can move over time. And this is especially here in North America, but in other places around the world, this is very much a growing movement, a kind of growing technology that is getting larger and larger. And sometimes these are called range coops. I prefer chicken tractor. But increasingly, they can be very autonomous. They can have solar panels, they can have climate control, they can move across a pastured area in a pre-programmed fashion. And of course, because you're using these birds still in a controlled way that kind of keeps them on the pasture, you're not only practicing regenerative agriculture in terms of soil regeneration, but you're reducing your labor in terms of having to take care of the chicken area. And again, it is really interesting the way that AI is playing a minor role, but an important role in the facilitation of those structures, because it allows them to move at a set rate, set in particular parts using GPS in terms of the pasture area, but also do a smart environmental control in terms of monitoring temperatures, monitoring humidity. In our case, we ended up winterizing one of our tractors. So it's not mobile in the course of the winter because we have too much snow, but it still allows us to isolate and distribute our flocks. So not only over time, as we continue to build these chicken tractors and take a modular approach to the way in which we house our birds, but it also mitigates in terms of illness and infection, that we aren't literally having all our birds in terms of one. Now, I want to take a moment to kind of transition to some of the more advanced or some of the more emerging applications of AI in the poultry industry. And, in particular, I'm going to focus on eggs, partly because a lot of effort is putting in to the AI pattern recognition part of the poultry industry. Where the AI in the broader bird, or especially the meat bird side, is really around environmental control and monitoring these birds. But where I think AI gets really interesting is when you start engaging the eggs, when you start engaging the production, the breeding of birds. And, there's a Canadian company that's been getting a lot of interest lately called Matrix Spec, in part because they have an egg gender detection capability. And this egg gender detection is a kind of scanning, but the way in which they're using that scanning, they're able to basically identify sex at a very early stage. And this is part of really a larger phenomena in the egg AI industry, in which, again, this is pattern recognition. And the types of patterns that they're able to identify are not just the sex of the birds, but different types of health, but also increasingly sophisticated types of egg grading. And the hypothesis here is that eventually we're going to have eggs that used to be discarded, eggs that certainly in the North American market may not have been deemed fit for consumption in the consumer marketplace. Especially given the price of food these days, I suspect there will be a market for those eggs, especially if they're able to have the science that, demonstrates that they're actually safe to eat, even if they might not be of higher quality. And that's where the quality assurance side of this AI technology is actually quite interesting. Partly because both on the meat production side, as well as the egg production side, again, we're able to fine tune and really zero in on both identifying problems before they happen, but also creating a new literacy of what quality means. And I think you've covered this in past sessions. But the main point I want to emphasize here is the potential for consumer education, because a lot of these systems are based on a combination of data collection and pattern recognition that are designed to make it easier for the farmer to, do their job, increase their production, make sure that their products, whether birds or eggs, are of a sufficient quality. But I think at the same time, there's an opportunity for transparency here. There's an opportunity for traceability where, particular poultry producers, particular egg producers will be able to correlate their practices. And we see this in terms of like free range or organic. And while those words I think can be kind of convoluted, I think we are increasingly going to see transparency between the consumer fundamentally and the producer, and it'll give an advantage to operations that embrace technology that allows them to verify their practices, allows them to verify their operations, and give the consumer a sense of security. And I say this because the issue of avian influenza, the issue of bird flu, and I can only speak for North America, which is where I live and where I'm most paying attention, it is becoming a growing concern amongst consumers. And even though a lot of it is fear and paranoia, it speaks to a need that the practices in the agricultural sector will be facing greater scrutiny. And if we're not telling our own stories, if we're not presenting our practices that we're proud of and that have the integrity and quality that we can assert, I think that'll make a huge difference, especially when it comes to people who want to charge a premium for their eggs rather than just be stuck into commodity pricing. And I before we take a moment to talk about the role that AI can play in mitigating the spread of avian flu, I do want to take a moment to talk about the role that data plays in all the applications I've described so far. Because many of the technology, certainly when it comes to mobile coops or monitoring or cleaning coops or having broilers in which you're able to monitor the health and growth of the birds that are being raised, a lot of that stuff is straightforward, and a lot of that stuff can be used using technology that is not proprietary. Right? Using commodity-based technology, the same way that I could build my own chicken tractor using pipes and wood and fencing and wire. I believe the same should be true of much of the technology that we're discussing. For example, robotics as a field is fundamentally accessible, and anyone who can follow a recipe, who can teach themselves according to basic logic, could start building their own robot now. So all the technology I've discussed so far, in some way, shape, or form, they collect data. And the issue of who owns that data is increasingly political, because agriculture is now a data-driven industry like many others, but many farmers don't actually own the data that their systems or their equipment or their tools are collecting, and that's a problem. And I'll come back to that, but this is important when we think about the ways in which we can be mitigating against avian influenza, because there have been for quite a while now people talking about artificial intelligence as a way to predict and control these kinds of outbreaks. You know, the University of Guelph, which is near to where my farm is, they're one of the world's leaders in this kind of technology and research. But this is from 2022. Right? So this is not necessarily new stuff. Similarly, this is a study from the National Institute of Health in the United States. That's from 2019, right? So artificial intelligence in terms of detecting avian influenza has always been something we've aspired to. And now that we are essentially in what I believe is a global pandemic, even though there are, reasons why the alarm isn't being spread as loudly as it should, AI is able to detect avian influenza. It's able certainly to increasingly identify early signs or on the predictive analytics, identify when the conditions combined with the rate in the area or the rate in wild flocks may be a concern. But in my view, none of this has actually slowed or stopped the spread of avian influenza. So even though there is a lot of language, a lot of technology, a lot of resources being used to try to use AI to identify and mitigate, we are yet to see the results of this. And I think this is an instance in which AI may not be the solution directly, but it may be indirectly. Because if you go back on most of the technology that I've been describing today, what I'm arguing is it allows for more decentralized production. It allows for more distributed production, because part of what we've witnessed over the agricultural sector over the last several decades has been mass consolidation, mass centralization, in which you're creating larger and larger operations, larger brooders, larger coops, larger egg-laying facilities. And these have become, unfortunately, very fertile for the incubation and spread of disease. Now, obviously, we can't control what's happening in wild environments, in natural environments. But I think where we can leverage technology to really make for not only more profitable operations, but more sustainable and healthy operations is by using a more modular or distributed approach, where rather than having all our birds in a single coop, we have smaller coops, more mobile coops, coops outfitted with sensors and technology that can do a much better job of identifying this illness and then isolating those birds rather than having flocks kind of gathered as a whole. And that's a philosophical approach. That's a design approach. And it's not clear to me yet if the industry sort of understands that or has that capability. But I think that's what it's going to take for us to combine technology with our intuition, with our experience as farmers, to make sure that we are making the most of both our limited resources, but also the technology that's emerging. And that's why I want to end by talking about the role of open source in agriculture. And, open source is kind of this obscure, kind of secret nerd society that, has existed on the internet for decades, but it doesn't have a marketing department, right? There's nobody who is promoting open source or saying, hey, everybody, check out open source. So unfortunately, especially amongst farmers, not a lot of people realize that most technology, if you're willing to learn, you can use for free. And I don't mean pirate or steal it. I mean, do it yourself. I mean, build it yourself. I mean, grow it yourself. And this is why I encourage farmers to adopt that kind of hacker mentality, right? To understand that you shouldn't be believing what the big tech companies, what the big ag companies are doing. You should be experimenting with technology as part of your practices, but making sure that you own and control it. And in that sense, if you actually start looking at some of the open source agricultural projects that are out there, There really is quite a range. And that includes things like the chicken coop controller, which is a really interesting kind of automatic door for a chicken coop. And I've seen ones actually that have AI that can do pattern recognition to tell if it's a chicken compared to if it's your dog or if it's another animal. You know, similar open source designs around coops, around chicken tractors. You know, Farm OS is an interesting open source database and farm data management software. So as I've been sort of talking to you about, hey, maybe you should be in control of your own data, you might be thinking, well, Jesse, how do I do that? I can barely figure out how to use my computer. Well, that's where there's a lot of resources that can help you figure that out. The same way that there are lots of other robotics open source projects out there. For example, this is the Romy project, which is based out of France, and it's a robotics for micro farms. And while they do focus largely on vegetable farmers rather than, say, poultry farmers, I suspect many of you listening now also grow crops, also grow vegetables. So again, the types of tools that you can assemble for free, that you can adapt and hack for free, there is a wide range of them, but unfortunately, there's no company promoting them. You got to be curious. You got to be a farmer who's just going out and trying to find that stuff. And that's where I'll say, just as a plug, the software I've been using today is called OBS Studio, and it allows me to do things like change scenes, so I can, you know, have this scene here and have my little TVs that show live shots of my farm, or, you know, when I'm talking to people, bring up shots of my horses. Again, I used to have a camera in our coop. Now that we have mobile coops, I haven't yet put in a new camera there. But again, it's nice to be able to have these options. Right now, our goats are out in the snow. So again, we don't have them immediately on the camera. But generally, where you would see them, we're so snowed in that, in fact, there's not much to see there whatsoever. But I hope my remarks today have been helpful. It was really meant to be a kind of overview of what's happening with AI in the poultry industry. But my primary goal really was to spark your curiosity, was to get you thinking that, you know, AI isn't some crazy thing that only the big technology companies can afford. No, quite the contrary. I don't know how many of you follow the AI news, but there was a Chinese company called DeepSeek that just last month released their own large language model that competes with OpenAI. And it can run on a tiny microcomputer. It can run on your laptop. You don't need a supercomputer to run this stuff anymore. So in fact, the kind of secret truth is that AI is available to anyone who has the curiosity to use it. And in many cases, you can use it for free and open source. It's just a matter of talking to other farmers and understanding how other farmers are using these tools, bending these tools, hacking these tools. And then all of a sudden, instead of it being something that is a vulnerability, something that's being sold to you, it can be something that you can learn, that you can adapt, and you can bring to your own farm in a way that can increase your productivity, potentially increase your profitability, but definitely increase your well-being so that you can focus on other projects and other things that are on the go. So thank you for your attention, for your interest. I'm very accessible. You can find me on the internet if you have any questions. But a big thank you to Poultry School for having this kind of popular education.
I have a question before everybody goes,
Please.
and this question will be obviously everybody that will hear this later. How do I know that you are not an AI avatar?
Excellent. I don't know myself. I wake up every day and I try to figure out whether I'm an AI or not. But here's the reason why I think I'm human. I make a lot of mistakes. But even though I make a lot of
Okay.
mistakes, I learn from those mistakes. And farming is an area where mistakes can be costly, but I can make those mistakes, learn, and keep going. So maybe that's why I'm an AI, because AI never admits that it makes mistakes, even when it does. But at least I can do that.
Well, that's good because I was reading the little notes that you put under your screen that say, okay, you're seeing yes, but how do you know that I'm not an AI thing? And if you're reading these, you're not putting attention to the presentation. Come on, go back to the presentation. So
Well,
that was very.
and it's me trying to trick people into thinking critically, right? I want people to think. I want them to question, is this tool going to work for me or am I going to be working for the tool? This is something we should always be asking ourselves.
So, yes, thank you very much for your presentation, and you really made it. You really put a point in your last words that maybe these few minutes is just sparkling your curiosity, sparkling your like going back to be like a little child, like a little 5-year-old exploring, smiling, with not any, let's say, contamination of fear, or
Yeah.
I'm good or not, or sometimes we do things just to get the attention for the people, and we lose our authenticity
Yes.
to maybe just share an idea, and maybe we think, oh, is gonna be right or not, they're gonna like me or not. So having these conversations like we were just talking before going live is having an open mind, but you also use another nice word that I really like it, vulnerability. Being vulnerable, like you should say, I did something wrong, but why we label that is something wrong? It's just learning. Is that
Yes.
joy of create something new, and let's give it a try. Let's invent something. Let's get together. Let's connect, and let's create something new. That sweetness that we have to connect with another human beings, and now we have the help of a very potent tool called AI, but we still humans. We still have feelings. We can laugh. We can connect. We can feel that something that can take us to another level and make this environment better. So that's the main thing of this conversation, Jesse. Thank you
Right
very
on.
much.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, thank you very much to everybody that is going to be listening to this very inspiring 35 minutes. And you know where to find our friend Jesse, and you know where to find Poultry School. And like we were saying, in Poultry School, we're trying to do some things different. We're trying to be focused, yes, in producing animal protein through chickens, but we still humans. We need to keep connecting. We still to have that mastery of wonder. So we really love this, Jesse. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, and see you in the next presentation. Thank you, guys. Bye.